Good morning, everybody. During the past 3 days, I have prowled around like most of you, I suppose, in the halls and in most of the meetings, and I've heard some pretty negative comments about the state of medicine in the country, and God knows there's plenty to be dismal about, but I'd like to introduce some good news. Spirituality is returning to medicine, and you can see this, I think, unambiguously if you know where to look. Let me show you some of the places where we can look. Back in 1993, only 3 of the nation's 125 medical schools had any formal coursework looking at the connection between spiritual practice and health. Now there are 90 medical schools who have come on board with formal changes in the curriculum honoring the connection between spiritual practice and religious devotion and human health and longevity. In 1997, the Joint Commission on Accreditation, which accredits the 19,000 healing institutions in this country, strongly suggested that if you want to be accredited in your institution, you have to have some vehicle in place whereby the nurses and the physicians and all healthcare professionals can take a spiritual history from all patients who come into that institution. I actually bumped into this last spring when I, for the first time in my life, and sitting watching television one night at our home in Santa Fe, I broke out in giant angioneurotic edema. That's hives. Anybody ever have total body hives? It's not a lot of fun. I may have been more miserable in my life, but I just don't remember it. So after I have my boards in denial, so I denied the need to go to the hospital for about 72 hours until I was so miserable, my wife just ran me out of the house and said, "You're going to the ER." So I go to the ER and I sign in as Mr. Dossey, and so the secretary is sitting there in front of the computer taking all my vital information in and everything, and I'm just, scratching and trying to be cooperative. And finally she wheels away from the computer and looks me straight in the eye and she says, "Now, Mr. Dossey, do you have any spiritual issues that we need to take care of during this visit?" And I was just thinking, give me a shot. Just give me a shot. But I knew I had to say something to her, or otherwise I'd never get past her. So I said, "No, ma'am, I think I'm in pretty good shape spiritually." And so she said, "Okay," and she typed that in. So then I get taken back to see the nurse. And the nurse takes my blood pressure and temp and so on. And then she looks me in the eye and says, "Now, sir, do you have any spiritual issues we need to attend to?" And then I really began to get paranoid, and I thought, what are they seeing here? Is it that obvious? So then I get to see the physician, and I got terrific treatment, and the hives were gone within, an hour or so. And the physician was the only person who didn't ask me about my spiritual life during this encounter at the emergency room. And so then I got back home and I said, "You dummy, what, you didn't, you've been talking about the requirement for the Joint Commission for Accreditation. These people are following the rule." And it just didn't occur to me immediately that this is exactly what I had bumped into. In 1998, the Association of American Medical Colleges required, and this is still in force, that if you want to be graduated from an American medical school, you have got to be able to take a spiritual history from your patients and to demonstrate that compassionate, loving care is a vehicle for good health care delivery. So you're not supposed to be able to get out of medical school unless you comply with that these days. Also, we have known now for about 7 years since Dr. John Aston's famous survey out of Stanford Medical School about why patients use alternative medicine, that one of the driving forces pushing people toward making these kinds of healthcare choices is because they have had what Dr. Aston found to be a transformational spiritual experience that helps people see in complementary and alternative approaches a worldview that is more coherent with their own than they see represented in conventional medicine. So we will never understand one of the major drivers behind this titanic social switch to CAM and whole person healing unless we bring a spiritual factor into the dialogue. Let me just say briefly what I mean by these terms that I'll be using here for the next few minutes. By spirituality, I just mean a sense of connectedness with something higher than the individual self. I don't care what you call that, whether it's Tao, the universe, a sense of cosmic order and beauty, or God, Goddess, Allah, or something else. You can call it Factor X. I just mean that sense of connectedness. But religion is different. Religion is the ritualized aspect of spirituality, a codified system of belief and worship and conduct, which may include a sense of the spiritual, but often does not. We've all known people who are deeply religious who don't seem to have an ounce of spirituality. We all know these days a lot of people who feel deeply spiritual but aren't interested in religious devotion. But they can go together, or people can have neither. I bumped into a few people like that. Let me just make some comments about the research that is shaking out of this field. It is already possible to divide it into two areas. One area includes the evidence favoring the correlation between religious practices like going to church and health and longevity. This field is alive and well. It's been around for about 20 years. It's called the epidemiology of religion among researchers. And this field contrasts with this second area, which looks at the correlation between prayer and distant healing intentions and so on with health and longevity. Now, this field now numbers, in terms of studies, about 200. These fall into human clinical randomized controlled trials and laboratory experiments where people use healing intentions to try to influence things like replication rates of bacteria in test tubes, kinetic reaction rates of biochemical reactions in test tubes, and so on. So those are the two main areas in this field. People condemn this field from the get-go because they know in advance it's nuts. You know, doctors know this. We know that this field can't be on target. And the reason, basically, is because of the dogmatic ideas that we're all dragooned with in our professional training about the relationship between consciousness and the brain. We know consciousness cannot operate non-locally in the world. We're taught that. Francis Crick stated this starkly when he said, a person's mental activities are entirely due to the behavior of nerve cells, glial cells, and the atoms, ions, and molecules that make up and influence them. If we hold this idea of the connection between consciousness and the brain, you can rule out remote healing intentions from the get-go. They are, in principle, impossible. I just want to illustrate that in my judgment, you cannot escape the impact of views such as Crick's in the culture. They really do have a way of popping up in some of the strangest places. For example, Matt Groening is the guy who gave us The Simpsons. He also does this cartoon series. Let me show you how you can't escape this view that, you know, consciousness is just nothing more than the brain. So what you have in this cartoon is these two characters always having these agonizing existential conversations, right? Jeff and Akbar are their names. All my life I've had a troubled heart. I've been tormented by the pervasiveness of suffering in the world. I've been perturbed by life's inevitable losses. I've been thoroughly freaked out by my own aging and impending death. How I've longed for some relief from the pain I feel. I've immersed myself in philosophy, but sadly that's been ultimately unsatisfying. I've engaged in deep meditation, but the insights I've gained have only been partially consoling. I've studied the great spiritual teachers of the world, but still, I need more. I've sought awareness in psychoanalysis, but after several years on the couch, I feel only a little closer to the truth. I've even sought liberation in carnal desire. But alas, those moments of rapture have been all too fleeting. But today, after all these years of searching, something amazing happened. I was out taking a walk when suddenly a small shiny pebble caught my eye, and as I gazed into the smooth texture of this tiny pebble that I held in the palm of my hand, everything became clear, and I was cosmically united with the universe. For the first time in my spiritual journey, I feel true peace. I put some Prozac in your cornflakes this morning. So when we talk about these transcendent spiritual experiences, we're just talking neurotransmitters and receptor sites, that's all. Well, the way out of this, I think, is to just first admit what we know and don't know about the connection between consciousness and the brain. And John Searle may be the most prestigious mind-body philosopher out there currently. He says that the present state of the investigation of consciousness, we don't know how it works. And we need to try all kinds of different ideas. Jerry Fodor, another heavy hitter in consciousness philosophy these days, nobody has the slightest idea how anything material could be conscious. Nobody even knows what it would be like to have the slightest idea about how anything material could be conscious. So much for the philosophy of consciousness. It is not true that spirituality has bit the dust in modern medicine, particularly prayer. Here you see a praying surgeon on the cover of the Journal of the American Medical Association not too long ago. This always reminds me of an experience that my wife Barbara and I had when we were talking to a large group of doctors in Tacoma recently. After our discussion with them, a female surgeon came up and she said, "I've just got to share with you the prayer I always use before I go into surgery." She said, "When I'm gloved and gowned and scrubbed, I hold my hands up and I pray, Dear God, now these are your hands. Do not go and embarrass yourself." So what is this prayer business? If you don't define these terms accurately, you can get into real problems fast. Here's how that works. Here's a guy going down, drowning, and he says to his dog, "Lassie, get help." Now, Lassie, be a good dog, and gets help. But it's the wrong kind of help, so this guy drowned because he neglected to define his terms, you see. If you're off just a little bit, it can really make a tremendous amount of difference. For example, this started out being an announcement for final exams at Lexington Middle School, but the I fell over against the F and considerably rearranged the meaning. I don't have a follow-up. I don't know if anybody showed up for these exams or not. I have had the opportunity to talk to tens of thousands of Americans about what we think prayer is. Most Americans will say something sort of like this: prayer is talking aloud or silently to a white male vertebrate, a short-tempered cosmic father figure who, when you really get right down to it, would prefer to be addressed in English. I want to define prayer differently as just communication with the absolute, and permit people, in terms of their own insights and wisdom traditions, to decide what the communication would look like and also what the absolute is for them. If we do not define prayer broadly, then we will disenfranchise most of the population of the world who just happens to pray differently than we do in this country. And I don't want to do that. As of this month, there are 9 randomized controlled clinical trials of healing prayer, distant remote healing intentions in humans. I'm talking about major studies. 5 of these yield statistically significant results. By my count, there are now 8 first-rate systematic or meta-analyses of these human clinical studies. 7 of these have reached generally positive conclusions. Let me just tell you what you see. If you just take a backed-off view, you see in these studies that religious affiliation is just not a major factor. I don't think it's a factor at all. You cannot find any compelling evidence that religious affiliation makes any difference in the outcome of these trials. Now, I don't know how you feel about that. A lot of people currently in this culture don't feel real good about that observation. And they want to insist that there are religions out there that have cornered the market on prayer, but you cannot defend that position in these studies. Why doesn't religious affiliation make any difference? Well, I don't know. I didn't design the universe. I just work here. And I'm just reporting what we see in the studies. When you put this to the test, if you had to find some factor, though, that does make a crucial difference about the outcome of these studies, it would be compassion and love, but not religious affiliation. The best review that has been recently published is 2 years old. Wayne Jonas, former director of the Office of Alternative Medicine, now the National Center of Complementary and Alternative Medicine, did this study with Cindy Crawford, his assistant. They uncovered 2,200 published reports in this field. There are over 200 laboratory studies and randomized controlled trials embedded in these 2,200 reports. How good is the data? Well, they used a way of judging data which is widely accepted in medical meta-analyses called consort criteria. The prayer data was given a fair grade of B. The mind-matter interaction, which deals with these highly controlled laboratory experiments, was given an A, or good level of quality. And the religious practices, looking, for example, the correlation between going to church and longevity and health, was not given a very good grade at all, because these are not controlled studies. These are epidemiological and cross-sectional survey studies. I guess we're always obliged to point to this study. It was the first one that put this field on the map. This is not the best study, but it sure got the ball rolling. It's Dr. Randolph Bird's famous study in the coronary care unit at San Francisco General Hospital. Long story short, the people in this randomized, double-blind controlled study who were assigned prayer did better than the control group who was not assigned prayer in many clinical indices. This is the famous Duke prayer intervention study looking at the role of prayer from prayer groups around the world, many different religions, looking at those effects on patients who are undergoing urgent cardiac catheterization and angioplasty. This was the pilot study. It's the first heart study first prayer study ever published in a heart journal. The prayed for group in the pilot study had a 50 to 100% fewer side effects than the control group. This study has been expanded to 8 to 10 major institutions around the country, and the follow-up study it's been accepted for publication in a British medical journal called The Lancet. It has not yet been published. This is the most controversial prayer study ever done, because the middle author, Daniel Wirth, is under house arrest for financial shenanigans. So the skeptics have used this as an excuse to come after this study and condemn not only this study, but the whole field. You see the logic there. This study is a triple-blind study looking at the influence of prayer on women who were trying to get pregnant in a fertility clinic in Seoul, Korea, using in vitro fertilization and embryo transfer. The people assigned prayer from prayer groups in Canada, Australia, and the United States had twice the successful pregnancy rate as the women not assigned prayer. There was 1 chance in 1,000 that you could explain this by chance. I will just say that the Journal of Reproductive Medicine has launched its own internal investigation of this study, has found nothing amiss in the study itself, and has restored it to their website. Dr. Elizabeth Targ was the chief driving force behind this study looking at remote healing intentions on patients with advanced AIDS. Long story short, again, the people receiving remote healing intentions in this double-blind study had a lower incidence of AIDS-associated illnesses which kill patients with AIDS when compared to the control group. How does it work? Well, no one agrees. There are two schools of thought. One is that there's some subtle energetic signal connecting two people. The other idea that predominates, I think, if you were to take a head count among theorists these days, is that there is some sort of information transfer without actual exchanges of energy. I happen to prefer that latter point of view. I like Sir Arthur Eddington's explanation of the uncertainty principle in modern physics. Here he is chatting amiably with Einstein. He said, something unknown is doing we don't know what. I think if we're honest these days, this is what we would have to say. We really don't understand this mechanism at all. I also adore Dr. Seuss's comment. It just happened to happen. I like these mysterious, very ambiguous, fuzzy explanations currently because I think it's just honest to say that we don't know. And some people say we're not up to knowing. Emerson Pugh, a famous biologist, said, if the human brain were so simple that we could understand it, we would be so simple we couldn't. Well, here are some evolving hypotheses. You will hear cynics and skeptics swear up one side and down the other that this field is just off the wall. There are no theories in science that could even permit this to happen. So we know that the data has to be wrong somehow. There's some systematic error that runs through it because there are just no hypotheses that permit any of this. Well, that's just flat out wrong. The fact is we're drowning in hypotheses. We are in a hypothesis-rich environment where this stuff comes from. And here is a short list, not too short, I guess, people who have come forward with ideas about how to explain this. I do not know which one of these hypotheses is going to float to the top, but I suspect that it will at least resemble that of David Chalmers, recently of the University of Arizona. Chalmers just says, on the basis of the current data, it is just time that we all in science bit the bullet and just declared consciousness fundamental in the universe. Just make it so. It isn't produced by the brain and can't be reduced to it, can't be understood in terms of anything more elemental than itself. That's what we mean by something that's fundamental. If you go in this direction, you have opened the door, it seems to me, to these remote, non-local healing phenomena that we see in intercessory prayer. I think that the most important implications of this field have little to do with whether or not you can use prayer to cure illness or improve longevity or lower disease incidence. I think it's wonderful that we do use prayer for those purposes. Certainly people have done that throughout human history. But the implications go far beyond whether or not you can use prayer in any utilitarian sense. And the implications have to do with what is implied by the term non-local. The term non-local is just a fancy word for infinite. And if there is some quality or factor of consciousness that is infinite in space, then it's omnipresent. And if it's infinite in time, then it is immortal and eternal. And so, for me, this is the greatest contribution of these studies looking at the non-local manifestations of consciousness. They point to immortality and eternality of some fundamental aspect of who we are. I think this contribution to human welfare dwarfs whether or not we can use prayer in any utilitarian sense. Erwin Schrödinger is one of my heroes in science. He had a go at these ideas back in the 20s, and he said, mind by its very nature is a singular entity. I should say, the overall number of minds is just one. Here's what Schrödinger reasoned. He said, you can't put consciousness in a box called the brain or the body. You can't even confine it to the present moment. If you can't wall an individual consciousness off from all the other consciousnesses, then at some dimension, all minds come together. If you can't keep them apart, and they blend into what he called the one mind, and what our ancestors used to call the universal mind. Now, if we could honor this kind of information and its implications, that consciousness is omnipresent, eternal, and immortal, we might be able to fashion a genuinely new kind of medicine, which I would want to call, in contrast to this temporal, time-based medicine, which we're currently besotted with in this culture, I'd want to call this new outlook eternity medicine. And this is an integral part of whole person healing. And eternity medicine and whole person healing ideally reassure patients we serve that something about them couldn't die if it tried. This is a more fundamentally consoling piece of information than whether or not your cancer goes away. If it does, how long is it going to be before you're dealing with another illness that needs also to go away? We're all going to die. The data is overwhelmingly impressive. But this gives us a way out. Are there any negative aspects of spirituality and religion we ought to talk about? Let me just close with this. Well, I'll just say, of course there are negative aspects. Here's Moses' first and last day as a lifeguard. A 1994 Gallup poll found that 5% of Americans actually pray to hurt other people. And that's just the 1 in 20 that'll admit it. There's an epidemic of negative prayer and intentions going on out there. Here's a nice negative prayer in case you want to use one. This is an old Celtic prayer. Leave it to the Irish, I guess. May those who love us love us. For those who do not love us, may God turn their hearts. But if He cannot turn their hearts, then may He turn their ankles, so that we may know them by their limping. Dr. Ken Parchment is the go-to guy in this field looking at negative aspects of religious practice and belief. There are some that we ought to acknowledge. When people are in the hospital and they get discharged, they have an increased rate of dying, increased risk of dying if they believe in the first place that their illness was punishment by God or abandonment from God, or if they believe that their illness was caused by the devil. These beliefs are not inconsequential. They're correlated with an increased risk of death. By far, in our nation currently, the most negative aspect of religious belief is religious intolerance. And I don't know if you've noticed it or not, but our country is awash in that stuff right now. We're up to our neck in religious intolerance. Jonathan Swift said, "We have just enough religion to make us hate, but not enough to make us love one another." And that just seems to me to epitomize so much of what is going on in the cultural climate in this country right now. I love these prayer and healing studies because they are the enemy of religious intolerance and narrowness. Because these studies show clearly that no religion enjoys a monopoly on prayer, They show that prayer is universal. These studies affirm religious tolerance, and therefore they are the enemy of religious prejudice, hatred, and bigotry. I think this is one of the most significant contributions that this entire field has made so far. I close with this. We are a nation of many nationalities, many races, many religions, bound together by a single unity, the unity of freedom and equality. Whoever seeks to set one nationality against another seeks to degrade all nationalities. Whoever seeks to set one race against another seeks to enslave all races. Whoever seeks to set one religion against another seeks to destroy all religions. Franklin D. Roosevelt. Thank you.